here to introduce our next speaker. Please welcome back Curator of Ethnology for the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Dr. Eric Singleton.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this morning's seminar with Randall Dutra, Lynn Shamil, and Steve Kestrel. Yep. We have two more exciting seminars for you this afternoon. Now, when it comes to questions for the artist, please walk up to one of the three microphones on the ends and in the middle so the audience can hear your questions. Now, here to introduce our next speaker, please welcome Prix de West artist, Randall Dutra.
Familiar faces here from this morning. It was a lot of fun, and I had some great material to work with, so thank you for that. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce the next seminar presenter, Mr. Edward Fraughton. His presentation will cover, personally through his eyes, the 50-year history of NAWA and the Prix de West. And especially noteworthy is that Ed showed at the very first NAWA exhibition and was a founding member. It is no exaggeration to say that Ed is a polymath. Everything, I mean everything, fascinates this guy. His mind is in perpetual motion. If there's a pantheon of modern-day Renaissance masters, Ed Fraughton securely occupies the top of those pillars. His iconic Anasazi and Omaha monuments are but a few of his impactful entries in an inspiring body of work. If you know Ed Fraughton as only the master sculptor he is, you are not given the full measure of the man. Aviator, inventor, expert skier in his earlier days, author, musician, technology nerd and wizard, active in many community groups, both artistic and otherwise. He is a man of principle and flexible in the execution of his many talents. I have learned so much from this deep-feeling man, this dear friend. Brother and mentor. You can't own anything until you can give it away. That's how Ed Fraughton sees it. On many occasions, I have witnessed him being the most thoughtful, generous, and intelligent person in the room. I love this man, from his shiny pate down to his shiny shoes. His kind only comes once, and I'm grateful that it's during my lifetime. I give you Ed Fraughton. I give you Ed Fraughton.
He promised he would take 45 minutes on the introduction, but cut himself short there. Thank you, Randy. That was very generous and kind, and probably undeserving, but I'd like to believe part of it's true. But I thought a great way to start today would be to pay tribute to someone who's been involved since the very beginning. I met him the first time I was here. And I told Susan when she asked me if I'd be willing to speak before our August organization, I said, yeah, I'll speak on one condition. And that is if Ed Muno shows up to help to support me. And Ed is here. So Ed, if you'd stand, I think we should applaud Ed. And of course his wife is there joining him, and without her, none of this would have happened. I'm honored to be here, And I think, all of us are amateurs in the very beginning, aren't we? And how we get here is kind of an unusual path for each of us. But to me, the story of the National Academy of Western Art and Prix de West has profound meaning. And in many ways, the hall's evolution parallels my own. So first, a little personal history. After 5 years of formal training in creating monumental sculpture, I spent some time teaching. And at first, only a few private commissions came my way. By age 29, I'd completed a number of full-size portraits, several small pieces, and my first heroic monument for Presidio Park in California, San Diego, California. So these are a few of the first pieces that I did. This is the piece in Presidio Park. And I had just been admitted into the National Sculpture Society in New York. This was a real milestone for me as a young sculptor. I thought I could never get in. That was my goal, to get into that organization. And there's a long story associated with that we don't have time for. But in the genre Western art collector market, my work was virtually unknown. So at age 31, I took a few small pieces to art historian and director of the Cody Museum, Dr. Harold McCracken. Some of you may have known him. For his assessment of my work, impressed, he began questioning me and then got out his 2 books on Remington and Russell. He wrote a personal message in each, stating his, quote, high esteem of Ed as a fine sculptor, then handed them to me as a gift. And he said, I look at the works of many artists, but yours is different, quite special. There's a quality in your modeling that is seriously missing in most of what I'm seeing today. So keep up the good work. And he gifted those 2 books to me, and I was just so proud to have them. I was hoping that what he was saying is that my years of classical training and reverence toward America's golden age in art was finally beginning to show through. In June of 1991, Clark Bronson and I, along with our young families, came to the Cowboy Hall of Fame with our portfolios and several pieces of work to apply for membership in the Cowboy Artists of America. In a basement room next door in the old Ramada Inn, a committee of 3 or 4 CA artists met to consider who they might invite to join them the following year. The public and everyone else associated with the exhibition were entirely banned from seeing any of these works. And these are a few of the pieces that I brought with me, just to give you an idea. But they had one of the rulings that they had on reviewing artists' works was they totally banned anyone from seeing any of the applicants' works, and they had a strict rule that prohibited the showing of our works anywhere else in Oklahoma City during the entire duration of the show. Now, to me, that seemed a bit odd. So every applicant that year, including Clark and myself, were turned away without discussion or feedback or explanation or even encouragement as to any future consideration. Other than a handful of members serving on the review committee, most CA artists had no clue we existed. However, several members of the Hall's board of directors did make it into the storage room and saw our works. Among them were the Hall's director, Dean Krakel, Cold Arms National Rifle Association executive Tom Bass. And Ginger Schimmel, who later married Fred Renner, who was the world's expert on authenticating the works of Frederick Remington. Another was Dick Flood Sr., trader of artifacts and founder of Trailside Gallery in Jackson, Wyoming. Personal friend of Joe DeYoung, artist Joe DeYoung, Dick had worked directly with Nancy Russell to save, cast, and market many of Charlie's original works, wax models, which very few had been done during his lifetime. Dick had become a major player on the national scene for promoting a renewed interest in the works of Frederick Remington, Charles Russell, Charles Schreivogel, Harold von Schmidt, the famous Taos painters, and others. My portfolio and the small pieces of work that I presented to the CA that year may not have seemed particularly impressive, but at least in the eyes of the committee members who did the reviewing. However, Dick, Ginger, and Fred approached me and told me that Trailside Galleries would love to handle my work. And then Gaines de Graffenried, a great name, great gun collector from Waco, Texas, looked at my pieces and asked if I might be willing to do a one-man show in the next year at the Texas Ranger Museum, where he served as curator. And of course, I'd never done a one-man show, so I agreed to do so. I thought, well, what do I have to lose? So after a year's preparation, in early June of 1972, I loaded up my van and headed toward Waco, long drive from Utah. My very first one-man show was scheduled to happen just 1 week prior to the CA exhibit in Oklahoma City. Along the way, I stopped in at C.T. McLaughlin's Diamond M Museum in Midland to see his fabulous collection of N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle, Harvey Dunn, and J.C. Leyendecker, and other paintings created during the golden age of American illustration. He was interested in why I was there, and when I told him, he asked to see my work. After doing so, excited, he said, you should be a member of the Cowboy Artists of America. To which I responded, well, yes, maybe, but I applied last year and they turned me down. Well, he said, I'm on the Hall's board of directors. If you can come and bring your work this year, I would like to introduce you to some important people, et cetera, et cetera. So having been rejected the previous year and lacking any further encouragement, I had no reservations or plans to come back to the CA show that year. At the Texas Ranger Museum in Waco, threatening tornadoes kept most people away. But Melvin Warren and his wife Lucille and a few other loyal patrons showed up. After comparing my work to the Remingtons and Russells bronzes in the museum, Mel was incredibly impressed. Mel was a stutterer, a real stutterer. He says, Ed, you are a real sculptor. I do sculpture too, but it's nothing like what you do. You should be a member of the CA. After telling Tom the story of applying and being rejected, he said, well, you should come back anyway and show your work this year. Maybe they'll have a change of heart. We really need you, he said. A huge dilemma. Ready to drive straight back to Utah, I thought, well, if I do as Mel Warren and C.T. McLaughlin suggested, because the CA's rule prohibiting the showing of any outside works during their show, if I do come back and anyone sees my work, most likely I will never be invited to exhibit with the Cowboy Artists of America. Big decision. But they've already made their decision and gave me no encouragement. for future consideration, so why not simply accept the consequences and move on? Despite the poor attendance, my Waco show was a huge success. My newest piece, The Bog Rider, which you're looking at, which had evolved from an entirely different concept envisioned for enlarging into monumental scale, helped make more sales than I had ever imagined. So when the show ended, I pointed my car north toward Oklahoma City. I knew that everyone of importance, including many CA artists, would be staying at the Lincoln Plaza Hotel. But having no reservations, once there, I sought out the hotel manager and asked if I might rent a small room where I could set up my work. Curious, he came out to the van, surveyed my sculpture, and said, "Oh, let's make this easy. Just bring them on in." He said, we'd be honored to display your work right here in the lobby. Well, that's where my career really got its kickstart. During the show, C.T. McLaughlin, Dean Crakel, and Mel Warren brought people in to meet me and show them my work. I made deep friendships with many people, including CA artists, those that hadn't been on the committee, obviously, including, well, with others I knew I had just ruffled feathers. So, strangely, that year, due to unresolvable differences between the hall and the CA organization, after their 1972 show, Dean terminated their agreement and began formulating plans to create a new organization called the National Academy of Western Art. And I, excuse me, had I not taken such a bold, crazy, risky step, there's no way in the world I would ever have been invited to be one of NAWA's founding members. And even more surprisingly, received the first gold medal in the sculpture category. Most organizations succeed because of the workings of one person, a visionary, who also has the ability to follow through. In this case, that person was Dean Crakel. Bringing in moneyed people from Denver and other high-profile names to serve on the board of directors, his past experience as director of the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa and dealing with some of America's finest patrons and knowing many artists from America's golden era of commercial illustration, Dean cornered Robert Lougheed to spearhead his art finding committee, or the process. Of course, Bob brought in his old pal John Clymer and other such luminaries as Tom Lovell, Bob Kuhn, Bettina Stanke, Ken Riley, Clark Hewlings, Harold von Schmidt, Donald Teague, Nick Eggenhofer, and others. For diversity, the newbies among the stars included Ned Jacob, landscape painters Conrad Schwaring, Wilson Hurley, portrait artist Robert Rochelle, and painter of Southwest Native Americans Brownell McGrew, expert painters and sculptors of Western wildlife Clark Bronson and Ken Bunn. To name just a few, I know I'm forgetting and leaving a few people out of that long list. I thought of a few just now, but I don't want to go backwards there. But to kick off the first NAWA show, a huge Prix de West cash award, I think it was $30,000, and a trip to Europe and purchase award were offered, which gave the show instant national status. Elite New Yorkers had never heard of such a thing. This really got their attention. It set an entirely new precedent in the world of American art. After a year preparing our works, on June 9th, 1973, at 12 p.m., the first meeting of the National Academy of Western Art took place. Keep in mind, up to that point, none of the artists knew each other, or a few of the artists knew each other. We had absolutely no idea what the show would actually look like until the barricades would be taken down 2 days later. And the format for the show then was very different because we had all the seminars first few days, and then the show opened on the last evening, and that's when everything happened. So nobody knew what the show looked like. And you remember, Ed, I'm sure, remembers all those big cardboard coverings out in front. Until those came down, nobody knew what the show looked like. Dean Krakel, managing director, and Brian Rayburn, deputy director, conducted this first meeting. And this is what Dean said. In the beginning, on behalf of the board of directors and trustees, I want to tell you how really pleased we are with your being here and with the quality of art in this first exhibition. The eyes of so many throughout the country who have attended our June show throughout the years have been on all of us. The fact that you came here not only to participate in the art show, but in the seminars as well is really great. This is the beginning of something new. And this is one of the first, oh, sorry about that one. Oops, these things are out of order. There we go. That was my first seminar piece. I think I did that the second year of NAWA. So Dean goes on to say, like a big piece of clay, it is up to us to mold it and to shape it into what we want. We have in this group many great opportunities. We've never lacked for guts at the hall in anything that we've done. Good art gives our honorees great stature. From the very beginning, the National Academy of Western Art was conceived as an exclusive organization, the emphasis centered around quality. Dean's idea was to attract artists whose works had already proven to be of the highest caliber, a goal for up-and-coming artists to shoot for. Many original members were nationally known. Some had mentored many other artists. Demonstration events would help promote the academic environment and concept. A few artists would be invited each year on a trial basis to see how well they measured up. The adjudication process was very carefully conducted as we searched for the best talent across America. As with the Prix de Rome and the Paris Salon, one of the reasons for such strictness was that all works are elevated when shown with art of the highest quality, whereas conversely, the best works are marginalized and diminished when shown with inferior works. One thing an artist learns very early is that all art is subjective. Once the show opened, one of my greatest experiences came from longtime hero Tom Lovell, who, seeing my work for the first time, came up to me, put his arm around me, congratulated me, and told me how much he was moved by my sculpture. Another was Bob Scriver, whose works I deeply admired and found inspirational. Still another, Bob Rochelle, was to have a profound influence in my future life and career. And Wilson Hurley and I became instant pals. Wilson didn't sell a single painting for several years because landscape painting was not the in thing at the time. At 6'9", he would often lean down, put his elbow on my shoulder, point and say, "Now, Eddie, if I just painted a buckboard with a couple of Navajos here in the bottom of this canyon, I'm sure this would sell. I responded, Wilson, you know what you're doing, and I know what you're doing. Someday the rest of the world will know what you're doing. Years later, Wilson Hurley's influence over other painters of the American Western landscape became immediately apparent. Wilson had given up a lucrative law practice. By the way, I learned to fly. My flying was kind of influenced by Wilson, who was an avid flyer and in the Air Corps, I guess it was originally, during the Second World War and the Korean War and then the Vietnam War. He flew a little spotter plane through the jungle. It's amazing that he survived all of that to do what he did. Oops, pardon me, I didn't mean to do that. That's to wake up the snorers. I apologize for that. So when he decided to become an artist, he had this lucrative law practice. He went through a divorce, told me his father disowned him once he decided to give up everything and pursue his artistic passions. Well, look where we are today. Excuse me. This hall represents the highest quality of today's Western art, which would never have happened had it not been for the National Academy of Western Art. Whenever I come into this room, the sheer beauty and virtuosity and majesty of Wilson's work makes me cry. He was a master, a true genius of our time. When Wilson was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and by the way, he had both his mother and father. He was the only person to have both parents inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, but he and Roz called, and I was honored when they called and asked me to officially induct him. How I miss this giant of a man and dear friend. Speaking of art being subjective, I also have the distinction of being the first artist to have a piece rejected from the show. When Mr. Crakel, what deemed to be religious art, a Madonna, was actually a piece I visualized as a possible 300-foot high monumental sequel to the Statue of Liberty, a West Coast Indian maiden named Sequoia, to grace Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay. In contrast to a piece of European art donated by Europeans, then placed where it could greet other Europeans as they immigrated to America to find freedom, my idea for the West Coast was to memorialize the longevity and permanence of the ancient giant sequoia, redwood tree, and the Native Americans who were here to guard they presided over the American landscape long before the rest of us arrived. So when Governor Ronald Reagan first heard of my idea, he aptly referred to it as something America really needs, and boy, do we need it today. A statue to represent responsibility. But as with so many organizations, over time, an unfortunate bit of politics eventually crept in. Unbeknownst to Bob Lougheed and myself, we both resigned from NAWA almost simultaneously. Sorry about that. At one point, I had an opportunity in California to discuss my differing views with Dean. And my position was that he had made a mistake in naming the National Academy of Western Art, while the artists who really believed he meant it was going to be an academy, really believed he meant it were capable of creating the academy, were being excluded from important policy decisions. I suggested he should have named it after the hall or himself, because it was really his show. He really controlled everything, but you know, that's what it takes, is a visionary who knows how to follow through and get things done. So he took my criticism and didn't make a comment. This happened in California. And later, I received a call from Rich Muno, who said, quote, "Ed, Dean owes you an apology, but you know him. He will never apologize." However, he and all the other artists want you back, and we've come up with an idea. And that's why I'm calling, to make a proposal. If you'd be willing to come and help judge the show this year, would you be willing to come back and show your work again next year? Well, how could I say no to that? It was the highest compliment I had ever received. So I came back and judged the show that year. Sergei Bongart won the Prix de West with this beautiful lilacs painting. Donald Teague with a very small but not so flashy jewel of a masterpiece watercolor received the gold medal in the watercolor category. I returned with my work the following year. So the question comes up, what is Western art? How should it be measured? The art of Western Europe once was considered Western art. Then when American artists went to Paris and Rome, Great Britain and Germany to study art, they became known as Western artists. Unfortunately, within our generation, Western art seems to have become more about subject matter. That is, cowboys, Indians, Western wildlife, and landscape. We should all understand that fine art is not determined by subject matter. I once told Bob Lougheed, I've just created a beautiful little modest nude female I called Water Lilies. I'd love to show it at the National Academy of Western Art, but I know it wouldn't be accepted or appreciated. Yes, Ed, he said, you are right. But remember, you're not a Western artist because of the subjects you portray. You are a Western artist because you are an artist who was born and grew up in the West. God bless Bob. He was so profoundly influential in our lives. We owe him so much. How we all miss him as well. And Bob, by the way, never returned after his resignation. Most of my work consists of small sketches intended to be executed actually in monumental scale. And I often use the word executed because that's what I do with my work occasionally. My mentor, Avard Fairbanks, was a student of James Earl Fraser, whose legacy is housed here. I studied gross anatomy with the idea that if Michelangelo believed it was essential to his craft, what could I ever hope to accomplish if I didn't do likewise? This is a wonderful show. To preserve its integrity and high standing, it's my sincere hope that quality will always remain the museum's highest priority. Like all of us, Dean Krakel had his many faults, but one thing he knew: vision and excellence should always lead. To quote a famous scripture, where there is no vision, the people perish. Visionaries always open doors to possibilities others cannot see. Arnold Freeberg, famous illustrator, once said, "Vision is something you can't give away. When you have it, but others don't, others in powerful positions don't, it really galls them." Well, for some strange reason, people love rules. Creative innovation opposes them. In the end, the arts and the sciences are how civilizations are defined. However, reality also creeps in. Due to financial difficulties, I'm going to forward here a little bit to show that what I do is I don't do little things just to sell. I do little things as models for potential enlargement later on. So this piece won a gold medal in 1977, and people couldn't forget it. So just a few years ago, we were asked to enlarge it into monumental scale. So this gives you the perspective. There's the small model. There's the enlargement. That's for a little bit of scale. Again, the model, and that's what it looks like in the monument. And that's at Mesa Verde National Park, the entry into the park, the visitor center now. So difficulties in 1985, the board of directors replaced Dean Krakel as the director, and for a decade the hall struggled to regain its footing. In 1996, successful banker and civic leader Ken Townsend was appointed the museum's new director, and they went through an executorship period, but then Ken came in, and within 5 years, all the debt problems were resolved. And a new $35 million expansion, including this section of the building, was completed. Ken instituted a National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum name change to better reflect the broader long-term objectives of the institution. So Ken remained steadfast in preserving the highest quality for art at the annual National Academy of Western Art exhibit, but sadly at age 54, he died prematurely as a result of complications from heart surgery. From the beginning, Dean Krakel groomed good friends to support his dream. He moved into an empty building and built what we see today. During the hall's formative years, Rich and Ed Muno played pivotal roles as part of Dean's support staff. Persimmon Hill magazine became a window into the West. The CA exhibit, Western Heritage Awards, then NAWA, succeeded through all their efforts working together as a team. Throughout NAWA's transition period into Prix de West, Ed Muno and his small staff continued to carry the ball forward. Yes, God bless them all. And excuse me, we've skipped a little part there. Can we go back? Sorry, go forward. I'm cheating, as you can see. Thanks, Dean, Kim, and now Susan Patterson and her crew. and the board of directors, and all of you for coming to support our efforts to continue to help this great dream grow into something even more profound. And last of all, thank you very much for the honor of asking me to participate. Happy 50th, and good luck to us all. Now, as an addendum to what I have just witnessed, or just written, my son Ted, who's worked for me for about 45 years now, offered the following. He was only 10 years old when our family attended the first show in 1973. He's now 60. As we celebrate 50 years in the making of this great achievement, this is to quote Ted's quote. My hope is that we will remember the vision of those that came before us. Most of the original cast of members, artists, and patrons are now gone. It is up to us to set the bar by example and execution. As we can wander the expanse of this great hall, my hope is that we remember the achievements of the great artists of the past who gave their lives in pursuit of perfection. As we find these great treasures, here and elsewhere, pause with great reverence and enjoy. These men and women had the power to transform us, take us to a place unseen, invoke emotions unrealized. They had great power in brush or tool. We can all take great pleasure in the fact that we are surrounded by them, and better yet, the gifts they left behind. They were the best in America, and perhaps in the world, end quote. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. I was told there might be time for some Q&A, and I don't know if any of you'd like to do that, but I thought in the interest of time, I invited Randy to maybe follow up and maybe ask some questions. He did such a great job interviewing earlier, I thought he might anticipate some of your questions. So do you have anything you'd like to ask, Randy?
First off, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I mean, hearing that history through your eyes was just a real treat, Ed. As I mentioned in my fractured introduction to Ed, you're always working on many projects, and I know that there's some in particular that you're working on now that are very close to your heart and faith, and I was wondering I don't know if it's possible for you to share any of that with us?
Well, I plugged a picture in here because I didn't know if we would have time or not, and I'm hesitant to do this because nobody has seen what I'm working on, but this is one of the tragedies of art. Oftentimes we are invited to do things, but people who do the inviting have no concept of what it takes to create great art. So the first thing they say is, well, we'll give you 6 weeks to come up with a design, a proposal. And they asked 6 other artists to do the same. Okay, we want it in by such and such a date. Then it has to go through a series of committees. They look at it, well, I don't know about, why don't you change this? But I had a commission to do a project, I thought. And this has happened so many times this isn't an old story, this is deja vu all over again. And this, first of all, I'm not a person to look up to as being a very faithful practitioner of my own faith, but I've had certain beliefs my whole life. And when I saw Bertil Thorvaldsen's work in Copenhagen, our church little lady, I was inspired. I thought, well, this was what church was all about, wasn't it? The Christian church was all about Christ. It wasn't about all the other stuff. So I've never done an image of Christ, ever. But I thought the time has come, I need to give it a try. So that's what this project was all about until the people in charge told me that the organization wanted to own the copyrights. And I said, no, I don't do that. I said copyright law was written to protect the author, not the institution. And I can work with institutions, but you can't. But if you own my copyright, that means you can take my design and give it to another sculptor who will execute it for far less money or, whatever, to meet their convenient schedule. And schedule is always important. It has to be done this time. They don't comprehend what it takes. And I'm never finished with the work, but I have to work on it until I'm satisfied. I can't be caught in a time frame that's tragically impelling. So I started to create this. The subject was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But the story, the way I've portrayed it, has never been told in quite this way. But I started with, I've got a 16-inch high figure, and then I had to peel him off just like 2 weeks ago and start finishing the image of Christ. But now, since they canceled the project with me a year ago, I've been working on this an entire year. But it's not really appropriate to show at this show, which is the reason I hesitated. But, since you asked, Randy. So this is the front. This was the proposal I put together in the first place. But it has a back. It has a front and a back side to it. So this is what happened outside the tomb. This is the Bible Belt, so I hope you'll excuse me for going off subject here. But that's the back of the tomb, and that explains what happened inside the tomb. Why were there ministering angels there? Why did Mary see these ministering angels? And when they asked her, "Woman, why weepest thou?" she said, "Well, they've taken my Lord away. I don't know where they've put him. Can you help me?" And they start explaining to her, "Well, don't you recall what Jesus said about his death and his resurrection?" She doesn't understand any of that stuff. She's not paying attention. So then she goes out of the tomb, and another person is there. And this other person asks, "Woman, why weepest thou?" We're missing an image there. Sorry about this. I'm trying to go back. Anyway, the subject is, there we go. So that's Christ pulled off. So I have to finish each of these figures and realize this is only 16 inches high. But it has a back to it, and nobody will ever see the back because it's against the tomb wall. But I thought, I'm so passionate about this. When they said they needed to own the copyrights, and then they basically excused me from the project, I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought, now I can take my time and do what passion calls me to do. And so I've been working on it an entire year right now. And I don't know if it'll find a home someplace. I don't know. But aren't all the great things, I mean, think of Van Gogh and what he went through. I mean, all the things he did out of sheer passion and never sold anything. So we don't do what we do to sell things. We do them for passion. It's nice to have a clientele base and patrons like you coming here to help support us. We really appreciate that a lot because it helps us continue this passion. But sometimes, there's a great poem written by Robert Service about a century ago, and the poem was, the title was "The Men Who Don't Fit In," and I'm a perfect example of that. I've never really fit into somebody else's idea of what I should be doing with my life, so I do my own thing out of passion. So I hope this is a preview of just one thing that I'm kind of working on, but it gives you, I think it's good for you to get an inside view of what goes through mind of the artist when they're trying to create. And it's totally impractical, you know, maybe. But I wish Wilson Hurley were here to follow me up with his lecture, because it would be so much more profound. But I appreciate the question. Thank you, Randy. And I don't know if there's time for any other questions, but I really, really appreciate your attention and your support. And thanks for including me in all of this. It's a great dream, and it's amazing how dreams really do come true, you know? Seth.
Yes, sir. Ed, your art has moved so many people and impacted so many lives, but you're one of the few artists I know who has literally saved lives with technology you developed related to aviation. And I wonder if you just share that just briefly with folks.
Well, again, that was inspired by Wilson Hurley and a few other friends. I became a pilot. I tell people I have my pilot's license. I pilot here and I pilot there. My studio is proof of that. But my flight instructor was killed in a midair collision in 1987 in Salt Lake City, or over the valley. Two planes collided. He was blamed for the accident because he was a certified flight instructor. And of course, it's always the fault of the small aircraft pilot, right? But he wasn't the pilot. He was just sitting in the seat next to the guy that was flying. They ran into a commuter and 10 people were killed. So with my creative brain, I thought, well, this should never happen. So I called the FAA and I said, you know, we should never have midair collisions. We have enough technology today, but we're using World War II technology, radar-based technology. But I have some ideas that I think would change all of aviation. And they kind of laughed at me. Well, what do you know about it? What is it you do? I'm a sculptor. So I invented this system, patented it. My patents were issued in 1991-92 era. So now I'm invited to Washington, D.C. to meet with all of the engineers from Raytheon, Honeywell, Teledyne, and the FAA, and NASA. And I'm explaining how this system should work. And it's so simple. You can't believe how simple it is. But they were just beginning to talk about this kind of thing. And I said, we've been dealing with World War II technology all this time. Let's do something new. And so my concept, I said, we need a new concept for airspace, and that is anybody can occupy airspace. But if they do, they have a responsibility to know their position at all times and to announce that position to others. So now anybody with a radio can see that. They can plot you on a screen. By the way, this was before laptop computers. They were just beginning to be developed. There were no color laptop computers. But I hired some people and we got to work on this system. So I'm back in Washington meeting with all these engineers, and they said, well, Ed, what is it you do? You're kind of a curious guy. Well, I'm a sculptor. A sculptor? Well, this has nothing to do with sculpture. What kind of sculpture do you do? They think I'm welding, you know, steel bars together or something. I hand them my portfolio. Wow, you're not just a sculptor, you're a real good sculptor. But this, what you do, has no relationship to what we're doing here. I said, well, try telling that to Leonardo da Vinci. And they, of course, they laughed. And they said, no, Ed, you know, that's silly stuff. That was totally different age. I said, no. I said, I think you've forgotten something really profound about your own profession. Tell me, what was the first class you took in your engineering discipline? Wasn't it engineering drawing? You needed to learn how to communicate with other engineers. And I said, remember this, during the Renaissance and you know, all these great golden ages of art, who did the Pope go to? Who did the Medicis go to? And the Pittis and other ruling groups? Who did they go to design the weapons of war? The fortifications for the city. They went to the artists. That's what Leonardo did. Michelangelo and others. So I said, you need to understand that art is the genesis of engineering. It's not the other way around. I won the respect of all the engineers. The only ones I didn't earn the respect from was the FAA, the administrative level. So I'm the guy who never fits in, right? So I spent 15 years developing this system, joined a group called the Radio Technology Commission for Aeronautics, helped write their manuals for how this system should operate. The FAA announced like 3 years ago, we're going to implement a whole new system for air traffic control based on, it's called ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance, my patents. But they waited, FAA waited 20 years till my patents ran out so they wouldn't have to deal with me. That's what organizations do. That's what government does. Somebody once defined the difference between a rule and a principle, and I thought it was a great definition. A definition of a rule is a substitute for thought. And the definition of a principle is a guide to thought. Now, we ought to be running our lives based on correct principles, but we don't. Every institution eventually corrupts itself because of the rules it passes to try to control people or outcomes. And that's really sad, and that's why people like me, never quite fit in, because we artists here, we don't live, as I said in my lecture, we don't live by rules, do we? We're exploring the unknown, really. And thanks for asking that, Seth. Again, it's maybe inappropriate for this meeting, but it tells you how the creative brain works. So, the creators, the artists, the engineers are who define civilizations. And that's what we're all about. So, thank you.
Seminar.